All right. Hello, everybody. How's everyone today? Good. The sun is out and we get to talk about houses. That's like, what an amazing Saturday. All right. Well, we have a treat for you today. We have three very, very smart the home building industry experts at your disposal. So for the next 30 minutes, we are going to have a really great discussion. Just to see who's in the crowd, just show of hands. Who here is looking to do a renovation? Renovation, or thinking, dreaming. All right, who is looking to do new bits? Okay, great. Who is just dreaming? Or I'm just tired from walking around. Okay, that's good too. I'll be honesty. That'll be honesty. All right, well, today we are going to talk about dollars and cents as it relates to a home building or a renovation project. So, it's always really fun to talk about design and all that fun stuff, but at some point we need to talk about how much is it going to cost and the whole money aspect. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Lots and lots to learn. So starting on my far left, we have Henri with CQ Construction. We also have Elton with Kerr Design Build, as well as Christopher Stiles with Alair Homes. So we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to be talking about what exactly does a budget mean? We're going to talk about the process for getting a budget. And last but not least, we're going to share some really great tips about contracts and how to make sure you're protecting yourself as you go into your project. So first and foremost, just show of hands, who here has heard the term budget? I need to get a budget, or I need to get an estimate, I need to get a quote, these terms are all just kind of like loosely thrown around. So let's maybe start there. What exactly is the difference between those three? Budget, estimate, and quote.
Okay, I'll go for that. Budget, estimate, and quote. So it's important you understand the difference between the three because they are very different. An estimate, better known as a guesstimate, is exactly what it sounds like. It's really just a preliminary number that they're throwing out what they may have an idea what it is. This is something you definitely don't want to hold a lot of value to. You want to investigate this. I can only speak for myself in my process, and I'll explain each step, and then I'll let the other gentleman speak. So when I do an intake call, I'm kind of figuring out whether it's custom home or renovation, what kind of a rough range is going to be. So I'm kind of creating an estimate. It's also known as a feasibility budget range. Now, once we pass that step, I'm going to get a bunch of quotes. Now, these are either hard or fixed quotes. The quotes themselves make the budget. So at the end of it, your budget should be pretty accurate with variances, with stuff that we can't control. So again, just to summarize, estimate is a guesstimate. Quotes, a series of quotes from independent people arrive to a budget, which the client needs to understand and approve.
No, that's really good. And I'm glad we can have a chance to talk about some of the things that maybe are different in systems. For me, I look at these as just being tools. And for me, when I talk about budget is an amount of money that you can use to have a conversation about something. So I want to do something, what kind of budget might that fall within? And for our process, how I use an estimate, we use an estimate once we have something to measure off of. So we've got plans, we've got something that can be measured. So we then switch to this idea that an estimate is something that you derive from measurements taken. And then lastly, a quotation, we tend to tie quotation as about something that would relate to a contractual obligation. I will do something measured, something that we can set out, and I will be willing to be responsible to that. So for us, that's how we sort of set budget. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what we can do. Estimate, we've got things to measure so that we can take a budget and refine that and tell you how much something might cost. And then a quotation, tying it with a contractual obligation. How about you, Henri? How do you look at it?
It's as I listen to the two of you talk, really what comes back to me is that my definitions of all three terms are actually fairly similar. But really what it comes down to is you need to understand what your contractor or the contractor you're evaluating is and how they define that. So when I come to you and say, we'll review a budget together, that's a slightly different, my meaning for that is slightly different than both Alden and Chris's. And the same way goes for an estimate or a quote. And we have slight variations in how our businesses are approached this information, this documentation. And so as you, the homeowner, the client, it's the best thing for you to do is to ask, what does your budget meet? Is it a rough allowance of money that I should use to make decisions? Or is it a assembled set of information based on trades and suppliers quotes and labor projections? Or is it a guesstimate? Because some people will say this is the budget, but really there is about as much work as went into as what Chris defined as his initial estimate as well. So, and I'll probably say this over and over again as I'm sitting here, is you really need to communicate and understand with the professionals you're working with to understand what you're actually getting based on what we said. And because we're all slightly different. We just heard 3 different definitions of 3 common terms that there are legal definitions for, but in application, there's all slight variations. And it's really important that we do talk about this stuff and communicate that together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, so a budget can also be, here's how much I'm comfortable allocating towards a project, right? So that's why I think Henri hit it right on there when he said, you really want to have these conversations so that you can eliminate the gray. And eliminating the gray will be a theme that we'll probably be tying into later on. So, and
Awesome. Thank you. And that's really good just to kind of set the baseline for what we're going to be talking about today. I think we can all agree too, budget is one of those whether we're talking about budgets, estimates, and quotes, really at the end of the day, what a lot of homeowners want to know is how much is my project going to cost, right? Can anybody relate to that? How much is my project going to cost? Okay, so for that dollar figure, what am I going to get? And it's really, really hard to answer that question, especially at the very beginning of the process and the project, when you don't have a set of plans. In many cases, you don't even really know what you're doing from a design standpoint. So starting those initial conversations can be very intimidating. So let's maybe shift the focus over to the process. So as a homeowner, let's just say one of the lovely homeowners sitting in the crowd today, if I was thinking about a project, what is the process that I would do initially in order to get that number and answer the question, how much is my project going to cost?
Well, I'll go first again. Again, all 3 of us will probably have slightly different terminology for this, but we're aiming for the same thing. So when I receive a call or a referral, I have an intake call. So I ask, what is your expected budget for this, whether it's custom home or large scale renovation? They kind of give me a number and I look at it. Right away, I'm going to figure out if this is going to be a good fit and match, if this is even plausible. Say that conversation goes well and they accept the facts and the reality, then we move that to a discovery. So if it's a renovation, I'll go to site and I'll actually really walk through, because I'm an old school guy. I need to visualize everything to make my original estimates correct. And from that, I'll come back with the feasibility range. This is a budget range. You got a low and you got a high. And together, if you're comfortable with this range, we're going to go into a planning phase. You always want to do a proper planning phase. Again, this might be a little different terminology between 3 of us. For me, we're going to start a planning phase contract. We're going to get every single person that has anything to do with this project involved, and we're going to get quotes. And from that, we're going to build a budget. And during the planning phase, what makes it high or low is directly related to what are the design specs, what are the clients approving, how much money they want to spend. They are in complete control of this. I'm literally a trusted advisor bringing them through the process. The end budget isn't even anything to do with me. It's really to do with what the clients pick and are comfortable for paying for. And only then, once we've completed the actual planning phase, then we would enter into a construction contract. And that's my process.
yeah, for us, we tend to focus in the beginning where you've got maybe ideas and you're like, I want to do something, I'm not sure what I can do. So how we structure it, and of course, these names will be specific to us, we call it a concept creation phase. So let's talk together about some kind of a budget range. And it's hard to use one number, so you want to try and spread that over. And we don't talk necessarily about what it will cost, we talk what it could cost. And we determine, the first and foremost thing is a zoning analysis. What do you want to do? How would that fit? What kind of project is this? What's it going to look like? We produce some drawings that allow you to ground that discussion with something that you can see and understand. So it's like, okay, I can do this. It'll kind of look like this, and it might cost somewhere between here and here. And the intention of that step is to allow you to be in a position to say, do I want to further develop this with all the necessary consultants and things that'll come in when you go into an architectural phase getting your permit? And so for us, that would be a starting point. Get you to a position where you can say, do I want to go for launch, or do I want to hold off and redesign so I can try and get something that's going to be more suitable for what I'm aiming for? Again, tying that back to estimates and cost and narrowing it down, the more you develop something and a mutual understanding between the person who's trying to help you and what you want, the more you can actually narrow a budget range to a budget number. I say budget, it might be an estimate if we've got drawings. That would be let's call that a first step, right?
I'm not going to go through my entire process, but what I do think is important is like, how do you start? Is, as the homeowner, as the client, the main decision maker in the process is to communicate within your family and understand what's the most important parts of the work. It's really common for all of us to kind of get a list, like a massive laundry list or grocery list of everything you could do in a project, everything we want to do. I want new front doors, windows, exteriors, or do my kitchen, my master suite. I want to do new floorings, new window shades, and I wanted to put in a heat pump and a ducted split assembly. Great. But something's got to give. Something will give, and that almost universally, everything you want will cost more than with the money you have in your bank account. That's just human nature. I've never bought a vehicle I never tested in a vehicle that I could afford. Every time it's always something down below. So if you're clear on what matters to you, then you can advise your contractor on those things so that we can give you with constructive advice on how to make your project fit within your budget and within your scope.
I love that advice too, because a list is really easy for everyone to do. You can literally walk away today. You can do one right now if you want, and don't worry, we will pretend that you are still paying attention. But yeah, it's something that everybody can do. And what is really nice about that is it kind of helps yourself to flesh out what is important and what is not. And with experts around the table, helping you to prioritize.
Yeah, that was a word that I was coming in with, because you can end up with a big laundry list of things that you'd like to have. And when you ground that against what that cost, then you start having to say, well, what kind of a compromise might I be looking at? And that's why I think design is so important, where the compromise that you might choose to do gets grounded against what it's going to look like. So you can at least understand what kind of compromise that'll be.
Yeah.
I also suggest that everybody always put everything you want. If we have to reverse engineer it, and that's my terminology, we can reverse engineer it once we find out what that cost is. But absolutely put everything you want on it. Let's see what it's going to cost, because that's your dream, that's your wish. Then let's see if it's plausible and what we can, the least important always goes first, right? Reverse engineer the whole thing afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, so great tips about how to get started, how to start your projects, generally speaking. Let's shift gears into contracts. So fast forward, let's just say that we have a design now. We know how much everything costs. Contracts can be, again, very intimidating. And there's so many different kinds and styles of contracts out there. So what are some key points that as a homeowner, what should a homeowner be looking at when it comes to contracts?
I mean, starting off with understanding the type of contract your contractor or builder likes to work on. Like we'll all give you a slightly different answer, but there's three main structures. It's either some form of variable price, whether it's time and materials or maximum cost or something else, or some kind of fixed cost or overall management agreement. And as a starting point, there's the terms and conditions of the contract, like, how often do you pay? How does the financing work? All those other things. But then there's also just literally how are we arriving at the cost? How is the money assembled? And how are things calculated when they cost more or cost less? And need to be aware of that, have a clear understanding of it.
That's really great. Who here has heard of the terminology fixed price or cost plus? Just show of hands. Yeah, it's really confusing, right? So maybe since you mentioned it, Henri, let's take a moment just to talk about the differences and the pros and cons of either.
Okay, sure. I'll just Elton, I know you're about to give a great answer. Go ahead.
There's lots of good answers.
There are. It's a lot of it I find comes down to the personality of the homeowner or what works better. Like some people want to know like a fixed price, as in this is what it costs for this set of deliverables. And whereas cost plus is more of like an agreement on how much money you will be charged in addition to what the cost will be. And so they're slightly different. And it comes down to how do you want to process information and how do you want to make decisions. I want to hear what Elton thinks.
Okay. I really talking about tools again, tools in the toolbox. And I think when you talk about the structure, right, we're talking about a contract structure. How are we going to agree to do business together? And each of those structures services, let's say, a preference of a client. And so we can talk about a fixed price. Someone who would like a fixed price contract, maybe they value some cost certainty. Maybe they want to stretch to get what they want, and they want to know that if they stretch, they're not going to be put in an uncomfortable position where the budget is going to be growing, so that we can be contractually bound to a mutually understood set scope. And they're not as concerned with, well, how did you get that price? What is the granular breakdown of how that lump sum was created? Now, on the flip side, many people have an appreciation of what's going to cost what it costs. How did you get that price? And let's put the focus on that is transparency. I want to understand how my cost is formatted. And what Cost Plus can do is it can allow you to work in granular budgets. It can allow you to see, okay, I've got this much money for this material. I've got this much money for labor. I've got this much money for here. Here's the money that's for me to operate as a business and be around to service warranty needs in the future, to take your call should something go wrong and we have to address it. And so that transparency then, the Cost Plus format is a tool to service someone who is predisposed to liking that more than other reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. The word transparency is a very important thing. What does transparency mean? A lot of builders throw that word around, and you know, everybody here, we're exceptionally professional, so we all have legit transparency systems. So for us, we have a client control platform. So the whole thing is transparent. Every single hour, what we did for the hour, every single item on that entire build or renovation is transparent. The schedule, the whole thing is on there. You know, I don't really like making a relationship based on a contract. All I can say is read the contract, go over the contract, understand the contract, make sure it's fair for both, make sure it's fair for all those involved. We're a hybrid system, fixed price as well as cost plus. You know, basically both are positive, both can be negative. It's really what, as these gentlemen have already said, it's kind of what the client wants. One of the benefits of having cost plus is if, you know, fixed prices, generally all contingencies are added and it is what it is. Whereas a cost plus, contingencies may be added, but if it doesn't end up happening, that client gets that money back. And believe it or not, that does happen. So it really comes down to what does the client want?
Okay, you said a magic word there, Chris. So basically contingencies. So, you know, we've all heard stories, nothing that they're, you know, it's going to happen to you, but you hear about delays, labor shortages, supply chain delays, things like that, you know, and that usually we hear that a contingency should be put into place in order to help minimize or eliminate those unforeseens. So just kind of as a wrap up to today's presentation, can you guys just share some tips about how to come up with a contingency? Like, what does that whole process look like as a homeowner? What should a homeowner consider?
I'll go first if you guys don't mind. Yeah. So there's actually more than one type of contingency, right? So you can have a scheduled contingency. A scheduled contingency will allow you to absorb some kind of a delay without affecting an end date. And in a good construction schedule should plan for something to have to be adjusted or go wrong, or the wrong piece shows up and you have to correct it. A good schedule with contingency built into the schedule allows for correction while maintaining a promised date. Then you have what's called, let's call it a budget contingency or a contract contingency. And that is something that you put in to handle ups and overs within the named scope. So it's not for unforeseen everything, but for all of the items that are in the named scope and on the drawings, if you have to handle something within that was over an estimated total or something like that, that contingency allows you to still be on your budget without going over that budget because you have that planned use. Or ownership of the contingency is actually circling back to what we were saying before. Ownership of the contingency is one of the key things between cost plus and fixed price. Fixed price, the contractor assumes all the risk and takes ownership of that contingency. If it's not needed, he takes it as a windfall. Wow, I did really good on that. We didn't need that. On a cost plus, if you don't need it, you don't pay it. So that's what a key difference circling back to that. But those two types of things are what I would hit on as contingency, and I'd love to hear what you guys think too.
Yeah, so you did a really good job explaining what that is. And because my view on contingencies is people often ask me, like, how much should I keep? How much should I set aside as a contingency for this project? And if you look around online, you'll find some variation of somewhere between 10 and 20% of the contract value is a smart number to have set aside just in case. Whether that's, and that covers things like schedule delays, material cost increases, and unforeseens. But also, a lot of times that gets stuck in someone's head that, like, that's what we have to do. But also, as the project progresses and the project changes, you can start to access that as a homeowner. Because now that you've gotten out of demolition, you framed up most of your house and you put in your windows, the risks of unknowns have been sharply reduced. And so that's a great time to come up to your contractor, bring in your designer, and then say, hey, look, we have now an extra X number of $1,000
Fun money.
available. Yeah,
Fun money.
fun money. So
Love it.
let's put in
Come back.
Let's upgrade our cabinets. Let's do those things. So it's also okay to use that money as you progress through the project, and your builder should be able to communicate that to you.
Yeah, and there's one more contingency that we've recently added, and that's inflation. Especially when you're doing a custom, because they are long planning phases. And then by the time you actually get to the point where you're building the house, a year might have passed, or maybe even 2. And the inflation could have gone up 25% on all design spec material. Well, that, a custom house, that could equal easily anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000, maybe even more, depending on what you have. So it's very critical that is not only in the contract, but it's more properly explained to the client the whole time, right? So that was a great understanding.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, great tips, guys. Thank you so much. Now, at this point, we are going to turn everything over to you guys, the lovely homeowners in the audience, for a Q&A period. Does anybody have any questions? We were just very thorough. That's great. Oh, we have a question. Sonali's just going to come with a mic.
Hi. I'm curious about the general management fee that you would have on a cost plus situation. Is there a rule of thumb for that?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a rule of thumb. There's how someone's going to structure their own business. If you ask that to me, I would say that there's a sliding scale depending on the ultimate top value of the contract. For, let's say, multi-million-dollar contract, you might be as low as cost plus 10, cost plus 8. If you start working that down to the next phase, maybe you get into a cost plus 15 range. If you're talking about a really, really small project, it might be as high as cost plus 25. So I think it's really dependent on the project itself.
Great question.
Yeah, that's a good point. I totally agree with that. The more expensive the project, the lower the management fee, obviously, because it doesn't make sense for somebody to be making millions of dollars on it. Just ethically, we have to be working together as a team and a unit. But there's a prelude to your question, though, sir. So there is a difference between project management and management fee. So in our company, we don't call it a management fee, and that's essentially the markup, because it isn't a management fee. It's actually markup operations, right? So that's a different number. And then the project manager is an hourly rate. But because we're transparent, we're very careful about explaining those levels. They both equal the same as if somebody just has a management fee, but they're separated to make it even more transparent.
Great. Any other questions? Don't be shy. All right. Okay, well, these lovely gentlemen are here till 4 o'clock today for the rest of the show. They each have their own respective booths throughout. So if you have any other questions, feel free to approach anybody on the panel. Just want to let everybody know. So the next step from here for your home building projects is really just we always encourage to talk to a team of experts and professionals. We have a ton in this room today. And then Sonali, if you don't mind holding up the contact directory, that is the Home Builders Association Vancouver contact directory, which everybody should have got a cute little canvas tote bag on the way in. So those are inside those tote bags, and they contain the contact information for all the professionals that are part of the organization and that you would require for your project. So a great resource. Just wanted to also give a shout out to Haven's podcast. Has anybody downloaded the podcast? Okay, it's awesome. There's been over 12,000 downloads. Measure Twice, Cut Once is the name of it. Season 5 just launched, and it's a really, really great free resource for all homeowners. Last but not least, we have an Enter to Win contest just as you walked into the main room. There's a little booth on the left there. Make sure you enter so you can possibly win a Cuisinart food processor, compliments of Trail Appliances. So on behalf of our panel today and on behalf of Haven, thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the show and enjoy the beautiful weather.
And thank you, Kathy, for doing such a good job.
Thank you.
It's clear to my person.